Hi, buddy, Jeff here again, and we got the video here. We're going to deal with this working with Germans on the Hofstede and all um, works on the six dimensions of one of the six dimensions of national culture, and this one's about what's called the uncertainty avoidance index. This is really interesting because this really goes with along with the whole thing of the power distance and everything. Uh, because power distance is not about power, right? And making decisions. And this one is the uncertainty avoidance index. It's all about the making decisions and the certainty or uncertainty of things. This is really interesting. This thing, it's related, and I'd say it's a complement. It's another dimension that kind of is a cross slicing this thing. It's not like it's a separate category. It's a cross slice that cuts into it, right? So, what is the uncertainty avoidance index? I'm going to read what has better said around it, and I'm going to give my interpretation because, yeah, I'll say that here. So, it's the degree to which the members of a society they feel uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, right? Now, we've already seen this with the process-oriented division of for the hierarchy, the process-oriented focus which Melissa Lampson talked about it versus the whole results oriented, right? So we already said that one for Melissa Lampson that the Germans are very process oriented. Right now, we're talking about the uncertainty avoidance index is that they're going to try to avoid the uncertainty because they always want the thing to be able to fall into place and make decisions, right? So Germans in general they feel very uncomfortable with having uncertainty, even in the meeting, which we already mentioned in the other video about this. And then having ambiguity. They like things to be exactly in this order and always that order in a process. And you go through the checklist and you go through the order, the process. They're into really process definitions. Process. The Germans in general are really into you got to have a process. You got to have a process all the time. You could never do something without a process, right? So no ambiguity. And then they say that the interpretation here is that the fundamental issue here is how a society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. And should we try to control the future or just let it happen? And Germans like to control the future, right? They want to control um, with their destiny, right? The future, the deciding how things are going to happen, right? And we said it was a very time controlled culture, right? Like in the Miss Lambda stuff. So here it's again, it's the same idea of being able to control things that are control what happens in time, especially with the present and the future, right? So, or do you just kind of let it happen, right, and just kind of let things go, and we'll see how the water kind of decides to take its own path along the river, right, or to let a stream actually cut into the sand and decide what it's going to do. No, you want to make a decision. I would really like to go I'd be really interested on this whole thing here to go to a beach in Germany. I haven't done this yet, but I'd like to go to a beach in Germany where it's just Germans, right? Or go to a beach wherever there's just Germans, and or a beach or a place where there's a lot of water and sand, right? Where people can make sandcastles, right? The cops are making sandcastles, and watch how the German children and their parents, what do when they build the sandcastles, or if they build sandcastles or build what in the sand with the water that's coming right from a source. I want to see how they do this. I want to see if they're always creating dams and creating things to block the water and do things. If they're always doing that, or if they are allowing the water to take its own path and to determine what it's going to become, and then they kind of build around that, right? That's I mean, if you want to get into the psychology of this kind of stuff, just go do that, right? Go to a beach where natural resources are making the decisions, right? Natural forces are making the decisions. in some way. And then how do these people groups react to that and see if they try to change the path of nature, or do they let nature just happen, right? And I think that my hypothesis, I don't know if I'd put money down on this, but I probably would, um, to watch how Germans do this on the beach, right? The children, and today, and their parents, or watch how maybe go to different beaches. You have to do this a few times. That'd be like a great PhD thesis. I've just given a great PhD thesis to some students, right? This is so cool. A master's thesis, just like analyzing psychology of German culture by beach sandcastles, right? Hey, that idea came from me, right? So I want to let others just kind of go do it. I'll probably go do it too. Boy, give me some trips to make, right? Um, and to see how that happens, right? And so the whole thing of having the high, this whole thing of having this, the uncertainty avoidance index, that means you're avoiding uncertainty, right? Avoiding it, avoiding ambiguity, and avoiding uncertainty. So the high aspect of this is kind of like rigid codes of belief and behavior. So you got these codes of belief and behavior. And that there's an intolerance of having an unorthodox behavior and ideas. I mean, look at religions. I mean, this is the religions are set have a lot of rules, right? All of them, whatever they are, they'll have a lot of rules you got to follow, right? And it's interesting to see, which ones have really adopted well in Germany, right? You can see this. I mean, really interesting how Catholicism had its place and still does. Even though Protestantism took over, it's Lutheranism, and Lutheranism really isn't that different from Catholicism. There are a number of theses, right? The 95 Theses of Martin Luther, right? But he didn't want to change everything. He just wanted to change a few things, right? A few. He had 95 theses, but there's still, when you go to a religious, ceremony, a church ceremony for Lutheranism, you're going to see a lot of the rites, kind of liturgy and that kind of stuff. It's all going to be kind of set, right? So that's all, that is specific behavior that you need to abide by, you need to follow, right? So you have an orthodox behavior and ideas, right? So that's really interesting to see. That would be a really interesting, and this all just fits. I mean, I've seen this at work. I've actually seen it in nonprofit associations run by people of Germanic culture or cultures that had been kind of had been occupied by Germans. Okay, I'm going to say that too, because I've seen this actually for French culture, where there are people from the eastern France that were in kind of the whole Alsace area that was occupied by the Germans for a long time. So you see the same thing. And I've seen a few people like that. And then the low aspect of this whole, this whole aspect of avoidance, the uncertainty avoidance, or the avoidance of uncertainty, uncertainty avoidance index, is a little more, you have a more relaxed attitude, right? Towards the practice, in which practice counts more than principles. Hey, practice and principles. Doesn't that sound like pragmatic versus process? Results versus process? So we can kind of see the same things that we got here of what Melissa Lamb said. And so we can actually kind of break it down here in this one too. A lot of what she was saying, just a slightly different word, the way with different words, right? But the same kind of concept here. And I think that this is really a key one, because this fits with the time controlled, right, versus untime controlled. It all fits with what Melissa Lamb said on two of her other points, at least two, maybe all three. Just this point here, and ambiguity. I've just seen it. It's amazing. I've seen when I think, not just, like I said, at work. In the past 14 years, I could just give all kinds of examples of this. The, the, the uncertainty aspect of things is hard for people to handle, the Germans to handle. Um, in general, that's why Americans are really good at this. Um, all Anglo-Saxons are pretty good at this in general. The French they got a system day, so they have their whole system de beauvoir now. And I remember making the book about working with the French, and I talk about this too, right? Where they have a very strong part to be very handling these differences, handling this attitude of doing it out of the box, right? Do it yourself, do it out of the box, right? Not always do it within the frame and the mold that you have to do it in. And the Germans here, you can talk about this. They're really in the word governance. Okay, the words that are used by the Germans comes out so very strong at this whole thing of the uncertainty avoidance, the avoidance uncertainty, the uncertainty avoidance index. But the whole thing of having, words that come out, the words mandatory, the word obligatory, the word compliance, the word governance. I mean, these are used in my company, which is a German, mother company, every single day, and it's expected you follow mandatory compliance things. And that's not always bad. I mean, that's good. It's good to have rules. It's good to have things. When you know what the rules are, then you know what to follow, right? But there's so much expectation of it, and so much value put onto it. So much value that it's seen as a value to just because you're respecting the authority and following the orthodox behavior and ideas, right? That's value. Whereas a lot of cultures, they don't care, right? They don't care about whatever you process, whatever works, right? Results oriented. So it's a very process oriented focus, like Melissa Lamb said here. This whole uncertainty ambiguity index is, or uncertainty avoidance index is all about following a process, right? And so that's kind of everything I can see on that right here. I mean, this coordinates with all the other studies. I mean, the studies I've mentioned earlier in the kind of the introduction, preface, introduction, all that. You're going to see this all over the place, and the Germans want to dominate, and they want to make the decisions for the others, right? But it's really interesting that they didn't have very many colonies, which is probably a good thing. Now, they did have some. I mean, they did have some where they influenced it heavily. It's not that they didn't do any of it, but they influenced it in a different way. They weren't colonizers actually all the time for certain spices and things that were economically valuable. There were other reasons to dominate, but you've got a lot of influence here, and this is really, really interesting to see how this comes to plays out in the whole thing, everything. So that's the whole thing of this uncertainty avoidance index. And I've already shown how this all fits. I've given a few examples. And I've seen actually nonprofits too, like I said, where you got to know how it's going to be all the time. It's got to be perfect. I mean, and there's a whole thing into the perfection aspect of it too, right? I'll bring that up. That where I've seen it where there's a strive for perfection. And this comes out with the whole quality thing of measuring quality, right? And that's on my other book about, got to go watch my other video book on measuring how to do quality assessment and quality measurements, which I'm actually doing parallel to this, which I work with a lot of Germans on this. And it's really, it's really interesting to see how they approach this. It's always focused on the pure quality. But what I usually focus is on how to deal with the bad, and then don't worry about the good stuff until you have to do it at the right time, right? So this whole ambiguity and the uncertainty of the future really is a kind of a key variable, and it's good to see. And you have to kind of play it out and try to get it as best as you can while you can, right? So there's that the uncertainty avoidance index, and hope that helps you kind of think about this and compare with other cultures, compare how they do it. I mean, I'm going to go through and I'm going to try to compare 3 different cultures on each one of these points. At least 3. So the Germans, the French, and the Americans. And then I'm working on another version for the East Indians, maybe the Caribbeans as well, maybe the Chinese. So I'm kind of doing this one by one. based on, lots of experience doing it with each one, each group, and we'll see how this all kind of fits together, right? So that's for that one. Let's move on to another subsection, another subchapter or chapter.